It's time. Boy, it's taken me a long time to get ready for this. 50 years. And, you know, for the first 40 years of being home, it was something I never wanted to think of. Wouldn't go to VA, wouldn't talk to people about Vietnam. And then we did a show in the gallery by Don Scholl, Vietnam Remembrances. And lots of veterans came pouring into the gallery, from enlisted men to generals, colonels. It brought back a whole new view of the war to me. It forced me to think about it again and try to come to some terms with Vietnam. I think it's really difficult for any combat soldier to come back to the United States and try to fit in, especially Vietnam veterans. Not to say it's any easier for young people that were in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever. It's always difficult. And civilians really never understand the wounds, because sometimes you can't see the wounds. A lot of the wounds are psychological. You know, it may not be a leg shot off, but it's PTSD, which can be horrible. Loss of part of your vision, loss of your hearing, and people don't really understand. Before I get going on this talk, I'd like to thank my platoon, Louisa, who helped me put together this thing. Without her, I would be speaking and there'd be no images. Missy, who has put up with my PTSD and craziness for a long time, and she was very supportive of this show. In fact, she asked me today on the way here, are you up to it? Are you feeling okay? Yeah, I was feeling good. I couldn't get it out of my head, though. It was just spinning around like a record going too fast. All the images came spinning by. I'd like to thank Carol Heron and Stephen for bringing her all the way from Houston. Of course, Don is here. There are some other veterans here from different wars, some Vietnam, Afghanistan. I really appreciate them being here. That means an awful lot to me. So with that, let's get rolling. As we used to say, saddle up, we're moving. Listening and watching Platoon was a very enlightening thing for me. And it was at the very end to have the obligation to build again, to teach others what we know, and try with what's left of our lives to find goodness and a meaning in life.
I'm sure the nice will find a bond for a rock possession of my soul. There are times since I felt like a child born in those two times. But be that as it may, those of us who did make it have an obligation to build it, to teach others what we know, and to try to bless out of our lives and greatness and meaning this time.
So that's why I'm here today. I'm here for goodness and meaning in my life, to teach others, to tell others what I saw, and to experience a little therapy, get rid of some of this. So thank you for being my therapist.
Thank you for having us.
I go to a reunion for the last 3 years of Dak To defenders. Dak To was a little place in the Central Highlands. And the next slide, I'll give you an overview. This is Dak To. It's nothing more than a hill that is leveled. Let me get my pointer. This sword was given to me by Carol. It was her husband, John Herons, who was an ensign in the United States Navy during Vietnam. So it means a lot. I want you to remember this building here. Anyway, this is our landing strip. I lived over here. Tactical Operations Center, artillery, and Dak To was a fire base. That meant we had artillery, and they were firing from a high point, so if the 4th Infantry Division or combat engineers were in trouble, we could call in artillery support. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Okay, next slide. When I first got there, I was a platoon leader, Delta Company, 299th. I was green, I was scared, and I was learning. I had graduated from OCS in 1968, and I spent a year in San Antonio at Fort Sam Houston, and was shipped over. I knew I was going to Vietnam. They just housed you for a year, gave you a comfortable position. I was assistant post engineer at Fort Sam, and basically did nothing, just hung out, and met a lot of old soldiers who had good tips for me to stay alive. I remember one old guy had been in World War II. He said, you know, you need to go to the pistol range every day. He said, there's only 3 kinds of soldiers, the quick, the slick, and the dead. I took his advice. I went to the pistol range. I never really came that proficient, but I learned to shoot a .45. Anyway, that was my first project. It was a maintenance shed for heavy equipment. My second project. This is a bridge that I built that was right before you got to Tan Can, a little town right outside our base. This gentleman here, the African-American gentleman, was my platoon sergeant. Without him, I couldn't have gotten anything done, because lieutenants don't necessarily know a lot. They need to know who to depend on if they're wise lieutenants. And this man taught me a lot. He had been a soldier in Korea. He was battle-scarred. He knew everything. So at night, I would go with him to the mess hall. We'd drink, and he'd tell me stories about being in Korea. And they were horrifying. I mean, horrifying. Next slide. I loaned him my Jeep one afternoon, and my Jeep driver was going too fast, made a quick turn. He went flying out and died. After experiencing Korea, a couple of tours in Vietnam, he died in a Jeep accident. It was the first human being that I'd ever seen dead. And I just, he was so close to me, and I started crying. And the chaplain walked up to me, put his arm around me, he said, "Lieutenant, it's not good to cry in front of your men." And I thought, he's right. I never cried again. I saw some horrible things. We're installing a culvert for the bridge that we're building. On the right is a Bailey Bridge. That's a typical engineering bridge that you can put together really quick. It's that metal thing to the right. To the left of it, you see concrete and steel abutments. We're building a real bridge there. My third project was working on a road from Dak To to Ben Het. Ben Het was a special forces camp north of us. And it was the scene of a lot of activity. It was probably 20 miles to Ben Het. It was all jungle. I don't know if you can tell, but there's jungle on both sides. And the Viet Cong were constantly there. They weren't necessarily messing with us. They may have been just moving through. But at night, they would put mines in the road. And one of the engineer jobs was to do mine sweeps in the morning. while I was building the bridge, we always had like young Vietnamese kids and old Vietnamese men and women come by and just watch. It was like, we were their entertainment. That's the tent that I lived in for about a year. And these are Vietnamese boys and young women filling 55-gallon drums with sand. We either used sandbags or sometimes 55-gallon drums, but at night, if a rocket were to come in, that would keep the shrapnel from ripping you apart. You have to think about being in a situation like that. People have to use the restroom. We had employed several of these kids. We called them shit burners. And they would pull these big buckets out of a latrine, put kerosene in them, set them on fire. After it all burned out, they'd stick them back in. This is a Vietnamese meat market in Tan Can. It was extremely primitive there. And this is Tan Can itself, the village of Tan Can. Small little village, lots of Vietnamese, lots of Viet Cong. That was a problem in Vietnam, probably Afghanistan and Iraq also. You really never knew who your enemy was. We had barbers in our camp. We had people filling sandbags. We had lots of Vietnamese people there. And, we trusted them, but you just never knew. Every now and then we'd find somebody that was writing something down. They were usually making a map. Now this is this was a neat helicopter, a Cobra. I'm sure they have greater things now, but they had rocket pods on them, machine guns, a pilot, a co-pilot, and they could direct their fire with their helmets. It was really, I thought at that time, a space-age war machine. Okay, this is part of our perimeter. All around Dak To, that hill, we had a perimeter set up where we had bunkers, we had tanks, and we had these things. I forget what you call them, but if you see written on the vehicle, it said angels from hell, but it actually says angles from hell. I mean, you didn't have to be the smartest guy to be in the Army at that time. They were taking everybody. Every now and then I'll stop and give you a little anecdotal story. When I was in charge of the perimeter, I was the reconnaissance officer and S2 intelligence officer. One night, and I had relations with the Vietnamese people or Mountain Yard people, so if something happened, they could send somebody to get in touch with me and tell me what their problem was. Well, the head of the village came to Dak To and he explained to me that these guns, back it up one, these guns were firing into the village. I said, okay, well, I'll go have a talk with them. So I went out to the perimeter that was facing the village and I put stakes in the ground and told them, do not fire between these stakes. You're firing into a village. The next day, they came and got me again. They said, a machine gun bullet hit the head of one of our young boys in the village, and he's dead, and we need some help. So I went to the colonel. The colonel said, well, go to the paymaster and get a bunch of money, go to the village, and take care of it. Got my vehicles. On my vehicles, there was a machine gun on each vehicle. So when we came roaring into a village, I mean, people, it was like, uh-oh. I had a Vietnamese interpreter with me, and I told the village leader that I was so sorry that I couldn't prevent this. And all this time, there were these Vietnamese people sitting in that Vietnamese crouch, wailing. A death wail. I mean, it was like it gave me shivers. And I asked the leader of the village to line up the family. And I walked by and gave each one of them a stack of piastres. And it's something that haunts me to this day, thinking about paying something, especially seeing the kid laid out there with half a head. It was a horrible sight. Dak To was a fire base, so on the fire base we had artillery. This is a 105 millimeter howitzer. And that's a larger gun on a track. So we had lots of firepower. At night, they would do these arc lights where these B-52s would fly over around our perimeter and drop these 500-pound bombs. It would shake the earth at night. You know, after a while, you got used to it. It's like living near a train. After a while, you don't really hear the train any longer. Okay, this is the road to Ben Het, one that I had worked on. And it was constantly getting mined. They would dig these holes, put a anti-tank mine in there about this big. In the morning, we would go out, send out a team of engineers with mine sweep equipment, and we would find the mines. If it were something that we hadn't seen before, I would get a call to come take a look at it. And if it was something that I'd never seen before, our job was to take them out of the ground, take the detonator out of them, and bring him back to battalion. That's what I was doing with probably a Russian or Chinese anti-tank mine. That's one of our dump trucks. Engineers had dump trucks. And it hit a mine on that road and killed 2 engineers. Okay, next. That's an anti-personnel mine. Those are the kind of mines that could either have a tripwire or a pressure release. And when you stepped on it, it went up in the air and then blew out. They called them a bouncing Betty. Another little story. You know, you had like a tour of duty there, and then another tour of duty for other soldiers. Well, 2 years before I got there, they decided to put this minefield out in front of our perimeter. So we got orders to dismantle the minefield. So we sent a group of engineers in there. You have a map, and it tells you where all the mines are. Well, the engineers went in there, the map was incorrect, and 2 engineers were killed in the minefield. And, you know, we had to get them out. So it was my responsibility with another guy to trace their steps back into the minefield and carry these 2 kids out. It was, you know, it's just a job. You're trained to do things, you don't question them, and you do it. When you get back home, you wonder, what the hell was I out of my mind? I mean, I guess I got a bit older and a bit wiser. And that's why they use young people in the military, because they're sometimes not so wise. And you have this feeling that you're going to live forever regardless. That's one of my trucks with a 30 caliber machine gun on it, and I'm carrying an M79 grenade launcher. I carried that because it exploded, and like I said, I wasn't a very good shot, so that kind of helped. But as a recon officer, I was given freedom to basically do what I want. Sometimes a reconnaissance would be to go find sand. So they would have sand to make the concrete. We'd float down a river until we found a sandbank and, you know, tell them where they could get the sand. Or sometime we were out looking for enemy movement. It all depended on what the colonel had in store for me. You know, I saw my colonel a few months ago, and I said, "Colonel, why did you want to kill me so bad?" He laughed. He thought he was John Wayne, you know, and it really, he was just one of those cavalier guys that would go and do anything, regardless of the danger. One of the good things I did was take those trucks with medics, supplies, medical supplies, food, and go out to these remote mountain yard villages. And we would bring them medical attention, sometimes, you know, check their teeth, check for infections. And, you know, it was kind of the yin and the yang. There was more yin than yang, though, for me. But it made me feel good to be able to at least do some good for the people there. And this is our battalion surgeon. His name is Dr. Ronald Bilchek. He's examining, I believe, a mountain yard child. A really, I thought, great doctor. I mean, I watched him operate on so many people. And 3 years ago, we were sitting together, and he said to me, "You know, I'm an ophthalmologist." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I was trained as an ophthalmologist." You know, like, that was beyond me. I mean, if you'd have seen some of the things that he had to do, you wouldn't have believed it. Okay, that is, I don't know if you remember the name Errol Flynn, but that's Sean Flynn. Sean, I met in Dak To and became a friend of mine. We went on a lot of interesting evening jaunts together. He was a wild guy.
That's Errol Flynn's son.
Oh, that's Errol Flynn's son. It's not Errol Flynn. I'm sorry. Yeah, Sean. That's Yvonne Carnew, another photographer for AP. But they were both combat photographers, always in danger, always doing crazy things. And on the push into Cambodia, or about that time, Sean and another journalist got on a motorcycle and drove into Cambodia, never to be seen again. So nobody really knows what happened to Sean. This is a bridge that my battalion worked on for 2 years. It was a large bridge. It had 2 spans, concrete, steel. That's my colonel, by the way. The night it was finished, the VC blew it up. I mean, that's what we were facing. They were definitely a formidable foe. They were dedicated, well-trained, and incredible soldiers. Okay, I'm in a town called Kontum, which is just down the road from that bridge. We had a temporary bridge there that they blew up also, but you could build one of those in a day. So that's how we got to Kontum. That is the lady is a French nun who established an orphanage in Kontum, and they had lots of orphans. And being in recon, I was able to visit her a lot and take care of whatever needs they had there. So that day, that night they were attacked by the VC, and she called me, and I brought the colonel down, and that's our sergeant major. And she wanted to know how we could help fix up the orphanage because it was basically destroyed. Not long after I left Vietnam, her Jeep struck a mine and she was killed. Yeah. That's still in Kontum with some of the officers from my battalion, some of the enlisted guys. Okay, this is a typical recon scene where I'm floating down a river, probably looking for God knows what. just killing another day. Those things that I have, let me get my pointer. These are smoke grenades. When I was out in the boonies, I liked to carry those in case we got into trouble. You could call in a helicopter support and identify your position by throwing a smoke grenade, and they came in different colors. So, you know, the chopper would see green, you'd say, yes, that's my smoke grenade, and they would help you out. We'd also go fishing while we were out on recon. And we fished by throwing a hand grenade in the water. And then we, grab a couple of big fish, and I had a Vietnamese in Mountain Yard interpreter with me, and they were great cooks. They really knew how to fix fish. So there were some joyful times. Okay, next. While I was in Dak To, we took an enormous amount of casualties. The 4th Infantry Division was pulled out. We were in support of the 4th, and they were basically our security. It was during the Vietnamization of the war. I don't know if you remember that, but they were trying to turn the Vietnam War over to the Vietnamese. So in the place of the 4th Infantry Division, they gave us a Vietnamese brigade of infantry people to protect us, and we were taking lots of casualties, dead and wounded. That's General Creighton Abrams. He's a 4-star general in charge of the war in Vietnam in Dak To. And I was in charge of security, being the S2. He'd been into our tactical operations center to have a discussion with the colonel, and he was coming out. So he got into his Jeep, and I pulled out my camera, and I'm standing 3 feet from him. I said, "Sir, do you mind if I take your picture?" He said, "No, go ahead, Lieutenant." And I lifted up my camera, and he starts laughing. I said, "Sir?" He said, "Lieutenant, if you take the lens cap off, you'll get a better picture." I saluted him, took the picture, and he left. I mean, that's what the typical lieutenant move. They expect you to do something like that. Okay, this is a picture of Larry Burroughs, and that series of photographs, which you can look at later, Yankee Papa 13, was taken by Larry. Larry was the preeminent photojournalist in Vietnam. He was a staff photographer for Life magazine and had been there many years. And I was the public information officer along with my other duties, which meant that if somebody came to Dak To as a journalist, they would have to check in with me, and I would make sure that they were taken care of, didn't go where they weren't supposed to, and they would have every facility I could give them. So I got to know Larry pretty well. He was quite an interesting man. I only knew him for about a week and a half, but I consider him a mentor of mine, one of the reasons why I got back into photography. So, I got to know him pretty well. We went out on a couple of missions. One time, our wire was breached, and we had Viet Cong running through our little encampment, and Larry was sleeping in my tent. We had little sections. It wasn't a little tent, it was a tent. And you could hear the machine gun fire, small arms fire, and I went and grabbed Larry. I said, "Larry, we got to get out of here. The Viet Cong have breached our wire. They're all over the compound." And he turns and looks at me and he says, "I'm a fatalist," and rolled over and went back to sleep. I went, "Oh my God." I quickly left. And about 10 minutes later, one of those rocket-propelled grenades went 20 feet from the tent. And all of a sudden, Larry was running out of there in his underwear. Now, he was in Dak To to kind of photograph the takeover by the South Vietnamese. Well, one morning, our minesweep was on that same road to Ben Het, and they were ambushed by either Viet Cong or NVA. And I got the call to go get them. Got the tanks, got my recon guys, got engineers with their rifles, and we drove out there, and there was bullets going everywhere. I mean, I was scared. If you're not scared, you're crazy. We got into the little ditches on either side of the road and tried to return their fire. That's when my colonel flew over in a chopper. His chopper was hit by small arms fire, and as it got closer and closer to the ground, he jumped out. So he comes running over the ditch where I am. The radio operator was killed, and I had another kid on the radio and decided it was time to call artillery in. And I'd never done it before. I'd done it in OCS. So I got out the old map and the compass, figured out where I was, called the fire base, got them on the radio. I said, I need a fire mission. Fine. Fire around the smoke. Gave them the coordinates. They fired around the smoke. I didn't really see the smoke. I was getting nervous. But I knew I was correct. So I told them to fire for effect, which is the command to fire the heavy stuff. Officer got on the phone and says, we can't fire. You're too close to a South Vietnamese village. I said, well, that's where the fire's coming from. He said, well, we can't fire. I said, you know, my men are going to die out here if you don't. Of course, I wasn't this calm. He said, let me have your serial number, your officer's serial number, and we will fire. And I said, I don't think so. So my colonel was a little ways down. I crawled over to him. I said, Colonel, I called in a fire mission, and I need your serial number before the fire. He said, Lieutenant Finger, get the hell out of here. So meanwhile, they didn't fire. And we did manage to get some air support in, and eventually we were able to get the minesweep team out of there. And next slide. This is back in Dak To. We're bringing back our dead. Next. This was a happy day in my life. I was wounded over there, went to the hospital, and I only had 2 weeks to go. So my colonel, or a month ago, my colonel came to visit me. He said, Lieutenant, we need you back with your recon teams. I said, I said, you can court-martial me. I am not going back. I've been in so many, really hairy scrapes that I just was not going back. And he said, okay, fine. You just come pick up your gear. I didn't even want to do that. But I did. Said goodbye to a few people and quickly got back on the chopper and left. A few days later, Lieutenant Cameron, an officer that I came into the country with, an African-American lieutenant, took over my recon teams, same ambush, on the road, same place, except this time they had mortars zeroed in on the little trenches, and Lieutenant Cameron was killed. You know, and one of the hard things about coming home alive is to wonder why you died and so many of your friends, why you didn't die and so many of your friends didn't make it. It's something that you think about a lot. And in a war like that, in any war, you have rockets coming over, and it's indiscriminate death. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, your number's up. And in some ways, you feel guilty about coming home. So Missy and I went to the wall. And when you go to the wall, you go to this book, and you write down the names of the people you want to find on the wall. Lieutenant Cameron was the officer that I told you that was killed. Lieutenant Trotter was the S1, the finance officer. He was killed standing on the airstrip waiting for a chopper to take him to some conference somewhere. Lieutenant Koch, he was the company commander of the 15th Light Equipment Company. That's another story. One night I'm giving the briefing. Every night I gave a briefing to let people know where the enemy was, what was going on, how many of us were killed or whatever. And rockets started coming in. So all the company commanders ran back to their bunkers. Lieutenant Koch's bunker was probably 40 yards from the Tactical Operations Center. When he and his sergeant got back in the bunker, a 122 millimeter rocket hit. It had a delayed fuse on it and went right into the bunker and exploded. It killed a lot of people. And we went there to see what we could do, just screaming and yelling and body parts everywhere. And I remember kneeling down and looking at one of the soldiers, and there were photographers around, and it made me so angry that they were taking pictures of my dead comrades. It was kind of like a reversal of where I am now, but I was just totally angry. I went back to my tent after we got it all cleaned up and started heavily drinking. I mean, it was just a horrible, horrible sight. And about an hour later, the chaplain comes by, and I'm laying in my bed. He said, "Lieutenant, we have to go out to the bunkers and, assure these guys that everything's going to be okay. I mean, everybody's shaking." I said, "It's not going to happen. I can barely move." He said, "Get your ass together. We're going." So we went out and visited all the bunkers, and the smell of marijuana was everywhere. I mean, I don't know how you could be on the bunker and smoke marijuana, but I guess it was how you could be on the bunker and not smoke marijuana. Anyway, Lieutenant Carher was one of my OCS comrades. He was in OCS with me. Next slide. Okay, so you find the name, their rank, the date they were born, the date they died, where they were from, state, and the location on the wall. So you could go look at 33E, 64, and find them. Next slide. So that's what the book looks like. It's overwhelming to think that each line is one dead soldier. I couldn't believe, when you see that book and you try to figure out, God, were there 68,000 kids killed in Vietnam? That's bigger than the Bible. It was a startling thing for me to see that. You can hear 68,000, but when you see this, it really sinks into you how many people died over there. So this is what the wall looks like if you've never been there. And somewhere, Gerald W. Cameron is a name etched in stone that you can visit and remember. Next. So these are some of the guys from the 299th, last year and this year. Top right guy, Upham. He was a medic over there, also the bartender at the Officers Club, which is another story. The enlisted man's club was hit by a rocket, and they didn't have a place to go drink. So they came to us and said, hey, do you mind if we use your Officers Club? We don't have a place anymore, keep our out. Absolutely not. No, it's our Officers Club. Well, we had a party at the Officers Club one night. Captain Thompson, I believe his name was being promoted to major. That's like to a field grade officer. And that's a big promotion. So we had a party for him. And we were there for hours drinking until we drank everything in the Officers Club. There was nothing left. And I think it might have been Chris reached under there. There was one bottle of Liebfraumilch milch. And I don't know how many of us were still standing, but I'll never forget that Liebfraumilch milch. We drank that Liebfraumilch milch and then kind of crawled back to our tents. That morning, a rocket hit the Officers Club. Now, we didn't have one either. But the thought about that, if we'd have been there having our party while a rocket came in, it would have killed 60% of the officers in the battalion. And that's kind of fate. Things like that happen. Next slide. More guys, 50 years later. They all have stories. A lot of them are regular guys. A lot of them have wives that come with them that have nurtured them and taken care of them. I'm always so impressed by the women of the 299th. You know that some of them have been through a lot more than I have. Regular people. If they weren't wearing their Vietnam stuff, you wouldn't know that they were veterans. Next, Dr. Bilchak. Back it up once. That's Mike Zimmer. He was the guy who came to the opening of my Return to Vietnam show and actually got me involved in the organization. But he was a medic as well. That's Larry Burroughs' son, Russell Burroughs. He tries to come to the reunions, and he was there for our opening. Okay, next. So that's basically a year in Vietnam. When you say to a Vietnam veteran, thank you for your service, you never know what their service was. It's become almost a, have a good day. So maybe it will kind of get you closer to what Vietnam was about. And that was my little view on a little hill in Vietnam. There were so many stories. And I like to say, and it's true, we were not heroes. We were just soldiers doing our job, trying to take care of each other. That was our war. It was a little bitty war for us, just trying to stay alive. So, anyway, thank you for being here. If you have any questions,